Let's go through and take attendance to start, and then we can get into the overview of the class, and then finally the class itself. Ben? Not here. Mark Kellogg? Matthias? Eric? Wait a minute. I got you, Matthias, right? Okay. Yeah, I already clicked you, then I said Eric, and I had two people raise their hands. It's like, now, come on. I know it's the first day of class, but don't try to confuse me like that. And then me. All right. I'm going to go through Angel to sort of hit the highlights of this course and tell you a little bit about how this course is structured and so on. And then we'll actually get into the actual material itself. We're going to work our way backwards through this. Starting at the bottom. Spring 2013, you should not be able to see that. That's my old files I'm using from previous semester. All right. Resources. As the semester progresses, as we find more things, I'll create resources and links. And if you find something that is particularly useful for you, by all means, let me know and I can include this. I included this one just because it seemed to be good, but again, I'm sure throughout the semester we'll be able to discover some new ones. So if you have any resources that you want to suggest, feel free to let me know. Discussion forum is a way for you to communicate with the whole class between classes. Some questions that you might ask might benefit not just yourself, but other members of the class. So those are probably best to post it into the discussion forum. The assignments, all the assignments will be in a folder. There's approximately one assignment per week. It is possible at some point we may double up and have some assignments that are worth like twice the points, but cover 2 weeks. But more or less, it is an assignment a week. We'll come back at the end of the class and look at the first assignment. Copyright and fair use. I show this to all my classes. It's probably less relevant here, but if you were going to use a graphic in any of your applications, a graphic that you pulled off of a website, I do ask you to respect copyright law, and as such, don't take too much from one site, and be sure to give proper attribution. That's kind of, in a nutshell, copyright law. Within an educational context, that is. Given that we're in a classroom, we have slightly different rules than other folks do. All right, on to the syllabus. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about this. Then we'll actually get into the course material proper. I probably have had most, if not all of you in another class, so you probably have a sense of how I run my classes. So we might be able to go through this a little bit quicker than we otherwise would. On the top of the syllabus is information on how to contact me. My office is still in the BU building, BU 211J. So for office hours, or if you're going to meet me outside of class, that's probably where it will take place. Some of you might have heard me talking about this at the beginning of class. The student asked a question. But the CIS classes are actually housed in the engineering division, as opposed to they previously were housed in the business division. So, but for the time being, anyhow, my office is still in the business area. So, really should not matter much from your perspective, and frankly, it doesn't matter all that much from my perspective. But it's a good way as we develop new programs to sort of have a more unified effort, because there are some IT people in the engineering division and there are some IT people in the business division. It's good that we're all under the same banner now, that we can focus our efforts in a little more consistent manner. That being said, my office is still in BU 211J. That's my phone number. It's better not to phone me. It's better to send me email. I hate to put it in those terms, but it's true. You're likely to get a much quicker response if you're going to send me an email. You can email me either at my regular LC email address, or you can email me through Angel. Either way, I'll get it. My office hours I have not defined yet. They will be effective next week, so there's no office hours this week. If the office hours don't work for you, and on occasion, especially evening students, the office hours that I have during the day don't necessarily work well for them, there's a couple of options. One thing is we can always arrange for other office hours if the particular office hours I have don't work for you. But what works for many students is that I invite you to sit in on another class's lab. In other words, I have a class Monday through Thursday in the day and in the evening. I have one class during the day and one class in the evening, those 4 days. And if you can't make it to my office hours, one thing that you can do is you can go and sit in on one of the other classes' labs. And I make the same invitation to the students in my other classes. So we may have on occasion students from other classes coming into this class for the lab section. So that's a nice little way. Usually labs, for the most part, are independent work times. So usually I'm just sort of hanging out, sitting there. All right. So you know, if you do have questions, you know, you can come to another lab. When that happens, let me know if you run into that, and I can give you details about where and when the labs are. Some information about the course here and the requirements. These are critical things. These are what we aim to accomplish. This is your class, and your percent ownership in this class, given the size of the class, is actually pretty high. All right. I think there are 6 or 7 people enrolled in this class, something like that. So even figuring 8 people enrolled in the class, you know, you're 12.5% of the class. All right. And you're probably higher than that, because there's probably less than 8 people. So if you're confused about something, that constitutes a significant portion of the class. So by all means, ask me. And if you're having difficulty with something, I'll do my best to address it during the lecture. On occasion, I might tell you that, you know, instead of devoting time in the lecture, we can talk about it in lab. All right. But ask the question. I try to remove any obstacles in your way to getting your question answered by making myself available in other labs, by having office hours, by being responsive to email, and so on. So, but you know, you have to meet me halfway, and you have to ask a question. And you have to, if you ask a question, if my answer isn't completely satisfying to you, remember that my goal isn't to give you the answer, but to help you discover the answer on your own. So, if you don't necessarily understand my answer, or my answer seems incomplete, remember, a lot of times I'm trying to nudge you in the right direction, as opposed to simply spoon-feeding the correct answer. I would encourage you to visit Angel between classes. I post announcements. If I would happen to know I'm not going to be in attendance for a certain class, like if we're going to cancel class, I'll let you know via Angel. If there's any sort of unresolved issues from class, on occasion, a student will ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, or we'll run into some sort of other roadblock. I'll do my best to investigate, get the answer, and post it to Angel. It's also good to check, because I'll give feedback about your assignments via Angel, and in addition, other announcements, other sort of thing, other questions from your classmates are through Angel. A bunch of college policies. Late work, I reserve the right to deduct for late work. I also reserve the right not to deduct for late work if the student is showing effort and is working with me trying to resolve whatever issues that they come into. The one thing I would say is if you are continually late with assignments, then something should change, right? Because, week 1 assignment, if you're a couple days late, that's fine. But that tends to snowball, all right? And by the end of the term, I can be flexible, but I'm not flexible forever. So, therefore, by the end of the term, everything needs to be in. And if you're still at that point worrying about week 6's assignment, it's going to be a struggle to get everything complete. So, if you're behind one time because, hey, you were sick and you weren't up to working on this stuff, and therefore you're a couple days late, or if there's a concept that you're confused about and you're a couple days late, that's no big deal if it happens once, all right? But if you're finding that you're consistently falling behind, then you need to step up. And I'm here to help you however I can. So stepping up might involve you talking with me and seeing what we can do to get your problems resolved. Or maybe it involves putting more effort in. I think it's important for you to work hard in this class, but I also think it's important for you to work smart. So know when you are making progress and know when you are spinning your wheels. All right. If you're making progress and you're moving towards the goal, all right, that's fine. Continue to try to work through it. But if you're really, if you're working on something and you just are not making any progress, then me telling you to work harder isn't going to get the problem solved. Right? You need some help at that point to get over whatever's hanging you up. There are 3 quizzes in this class. The quizzes are, in my mind, pretty easy. There are 14 weekly assignments, so roughly 1 assignment per week. And then there's a final exam, and that should add up to 100 points. So 15 points worth of quizzes, 15 points worth of final, 70 points worth of assignments. Then it's a standard 100, 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s for the grade. This is the sort of map of where we're going. I list each week which homework assignment is due. The first week there is nothing due. That doesn't mean that you don't have work to do, but the assignment that you'll be working on isn't due this week. So I have listed in this homework due column the assignment that is due that week. Typically assignments will be assigned one week and then due the following week. So your first homework assignment is assigned this week, but it's not due this week. It is due next week. This book is organized by app. In other words, each chapter is its own app. All right? And each chapter sort of takes us deeper and deeper into the world of Android development. All right? But one thing that's nice about it is each one is organized as an app. So it's sort of a self-contained. This is the UI for it. This is the processing logic for it. These are the other resource files for it, and so on. And that's how it's organized. There is, I'm not aware of the URL off the top of my head, but if you look in the beginning of the book, there is a place for you to download all the sample code. And that would be a real good idea to do. That way you can play along with it and do some things. How many of you have laptops? If possible, it would be good if you can install the Android development kit on your laptops and bring those to class. The reason for that is one thing I do in this class is, in addition to us looking at the app and analyzing it and figuring out how it works and demonstrating certain things about it, one thing I do is, a lot of times, is we work through examples of taking and altering an app. All right? That's a good way to learn programming. And in fact, in many jobs, your first task is to be a, quote, maintenance programmer. Whereas someone has a program that does something, you got to change it to do something else. All right? And that's a good way to kind of hone your skills. You know, it's kind of a stepping point into being able to create your own applications. And it's a good way to sharpen your skills. And it's a good way to show that you really understand what's going on. All right? So if you can do that, and again, we probably won't be in a position to do that for a couple classes, but that would be a good thing. And I'll try to warn you if I plan on doing that in advance. But if it's not too big of a deal, if you could make a point to bring a laptop with the Android platform installed, that would be great. I do have devices that I bring to class that you can use if you do not have an Android device. In addition, the lab is supposed to be set up with the proper development environment. I have not verified that that is the case. Okay, so you know, well, there's a discussion on how to install it in the book, and there's pretty good documentation. We can talk about it, and we can answer any questions. Today, one of the things I'm going to do, one of the things on the agenda is to talk about the components that you need to download and install. All right, so hopefully that will give you some information. But again, short of actually doing it, you know, it's hard. If you do bring your laptop in, we can troubleshoot it. You know, if you're having trouble with the install, or we can try to figure out what's going on. All right, any questions about this? All right. Okay. In the mobile world, in the mobile environment, organizations can have a presence in the mobile world a couple different ways. And one way is by creating native apps for the particular platform, and the other way is to create mobile websites. Mobile websites are websites or applications that are accessed through a web browser, whereas apps are, you know, have their own icon and they're sort of self-contained. Oftentimes, an organization will take the strategy. Oftentimes, an organization can't pick and choose what they're going to do, and oftentimes, an organization will do all of the above. All right, simply because, you know, if someone does not have an app installed, they may still want to be able to access information about the organization, and that can be done via a mobile website. Apps have the advantage of being very focused. In other words, an app typically is devoted to doing something and doing something well, as opposed to a browser-based application, which is sort of geared towards the least common denominator and getting anywhere and doing anything once you get on the web. Apps are also written for a particular platform. All right? In other words, if you want an Android app and an iPhone app, you have to develop two apps. You have to develop an app for Android, and you have to develop an app for iPhone. Because you're writing specifically for a device, though, you can sort of fine-tune your app, and you can write it specifically to that device, as opposed to the web and web standards, which is a more general, generic kind of solution that may be more universal. In other words, you don't need a particular kind of device to access a mobile website, but it's not geared towards any one particular device, and it doesn't take advantage of all the features of that one particular device. That's kind of that in an overview, and the focus of this class is developing in an Android environment. How many of you have or have seen an Android device? All right, you all have, so we won't really spend much time talking about that. All right. Android is Google's backed operating system. It comes out in versions, and I don't know what the highest version is, 4 something now. Does anyone know that? I expect it would be 4 something would be the highest version that's out now. The challenge of Android compared to iPhone, things always contain their advantages and disadvantages. And in a way, the difference between the Android environment and Apple mirrors what the differences in the PC world between Apple's and Windows-based machines. The difference is that there's relatively only a few kinds of hardware that iOS runs on, right? There's the iPad, there's the iPad 2, there's a handful of versions of iOS, there's the iPhone, there's the, what's the little one? The iPod, There's a handful of things that operating system runs on, compared to Android, where you have all kinds of different hardware makers that make Android phones. It's similar in some respects to the Windows environment, all right? Whereas the Windows environment, you could have PCs of many different manufacturers, and it had to work with many different manufacturers' hardware and so on. That's more of a challenge. The upside of it is that typically it's going to be lower priced, right? Because you're not tied to a particular kind of hardware. There's competition, and that can drive down price. That's the upside of it from the perspective of Androids or Windows. The downside of it is that you run into these little bothersome version inconsistencies and issues, whereas a particular application may crash on one hardware, on one particular device and run on another one. So again, that's sort of a problem that you don't have in Apple's world, because Apple has such tight control over everything, all right, that there's less variance between the platforms that it's going to run in. If you are going to run something on a device, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a few minutes. I don't want to skip ahead to that. Right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the components of the Android development platform. All right, and I believe this is in the textbook in the chapter Getting Started or Before You Start or something like that. All right. So I'd like to talk about the components and the things that you need to install to make Android, to make your machine available to run Android. First of all, you need Java. And you need the Java SDK, or Software Development Kit, not the JRE. It's sometimes confusing when people say their machine has Java. Very often, unless you're doing Java development, you'll have the JRE, which is the Java runtime environment. That will allow you to run Java applications or applets. All right. Well, you get that when you download the SDK. You really need the Java SDK to do that. So this should be like the first thing you install. Actually, the Java SDK or JDK, Java Development Kit. If we look at it here, Java SE, get what SE, Java Standard Edition, thank you. The JDK would be, the Java Platform JDK would be what you mean. These are the packages that allow you to develop Java code, to develop and run Java code. All right. That's the most recent one. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the most recent one. Correct. You do not need the NetBeans. Okay, Java is the language of Android, and we'll spend some time going over some Java basics. How many of you have taken a Java class here? Okay, a handful of people have, all right? For those of you that haven't, if you've done C#, it is a similar syntax. I know all of you have done some programming, so one thing we'll do is we'll spend a little bit of time reviewing some of the Java constructs and Java syntax, so we don't throw you into the fire too quickly as far as hashing through that. But that's the starting point, downloading Java. All right. Once you've downloaded Java and installed that, you want to install Eclipse. All right. What is Eclipse? Eclipse is an IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. Most of you probably are familiar with Visual Studio. Visual Studio is an IDE. It allows you to do pretty much everything you need to do to develop software. So it's an integrated development environment. Eclipse is an IDE for the non-Microsoft world. And you can use it to create Java, and you can use it with proper add-ons to create Android applications. So that would be the second thing that you would need after JDK, is you would need Eclipse installed. All right. You then need the Android SDK. I sure hope I brought enough paper here, right? Because we're running down a list of things. And that is both sort of the beauty and the difficulty with this sort of component-based system. So a lot of components have to talk with each other, right? And as such, if something's not hooked right, you know, you have the potential to run into difficulties. The Android SDK is the set of classes that form the Android framework. This would be analogous to like the ASP.NET framework or the .NET framework. When we talk about a framework, what are we talking about? We're talking about sort of a set of classes that handle some sort of fundamental things that you can build upon. All right? For those of you that have done things in ASP.NET, you know, one of the classes that you have is a web form. There's a class for that, right? That means that you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. There's some characteristics and there's some behaviors that you automatically get when you use a web form. And when you use that component, you can then sort of get a head start in developing. You don't have to develop everything from scratch. All right? The Android SDK serves a similar role. It gives you a set of classes that sort of form the framework, the building blocks of your Android development platform. So things such as views, things such as image views or text views, different components that you can use to build an Android application, all right, are contained within the SDK. So that's the next thing that you need to install. After that, you need to install the ADT plugin for Eclipse. Believe me, this sounds like a long process, but like anything else, one thing at a time. The ADT plugin is responsible for connecting Eclipse with the Android SDK. In other words, straight out of the box, Eclipse doesn't know anything about Android development. It knows about Java development, but it doesn't know anything about Android development. The ADT plugin sort of connects Eclipse to a set of Android development tools. So you need to install that within Eclipse to allow you to be able to run Android applications. Do keep in mind that Eclipse is not the only IDE that you can use. There's other IDEs available as well for Android development. Eclipse is just probably one of the more popular ones, and it's the one that we're going to use in this class. So the ADT plugin, Android Development Tools plugin, connects Android SDK with Eclipse. The next thing you need to do is download at least one Android platform. There's different versions of Android, and you can develop for any number of different versions. Typically, things are sort of forward compatible. So in other words, if I develop something for an Android, 2.2 version, it'll run on newer versions as well. So you can kind of pick like the minimum version that you wanna develop for. But you can download any number of different versions to this. Obviously, as enhancements are made and more features are added, there's advantages to having some of the newer ones. But for forward compatibility, there's advantages of having some of the older ones too. I think on mine I have two. I think I have one old and one new platform installed. That way I can play with some of the newest aspects of the framework, or I can go back and develop an older application that runs on older versions. The next thing you need is either a virtual device or a real device to test your code on. So when you run something, you can run it and you can define a virtual device that has the characteristics of any of the Android platforms you've defined. No, not necessarily. In other words, it will have a platform associated with it, but there could be a lot of other devices that have the same Android platform. Not necessarily. For example, the tablet that I have here is running Android 4 something. All right. My phone is running Android 2.2, I believe, if I remember right. I couldn't run something developed for Android 4 on my phone, but I could run something developed for Android 2.2 on the tablet that's running Android 4. More or less, or lower, you know. I mean, so in other words, I wouldn't have to exclusively run Android 4.0 on this. I could run an application developed for an earlier version of Android on this, and that would work fine. But I couldn't go and run something newer. If Android 5 comes out, I couldn't run an Android 5 device unless I've upgraded the device. Now, as far as my phone goes, I don't know if there's an upgrade available for it. It's possible that I'm just being lazy, and that's why it's running the old version. A lot of times there's upgrades made available for you, and you can upgrade your phone to newer versions. Now, there might be hardware limitations that would keep me from doing that, so maybe the newer version isn't available for that reason on my phone. Or maybe I just haven't gotten around to installing it. I'm not really sure. So this is an overview of the things that you need. All right? So installing this stuff and getting this stuff ready is not a hard process. All right? But it's a process that has a lot of different steps in it. All right? And you have to make sure that you've gotten that. There are sites that have good resources as far as installing the Android platform. Developer.android.com has any number of them. And they have tips specific to the platform. So for example, here it's telling you make sure you have the Java SE JDK installed. And this installer happens to look for the proper JDK to be installed. And then you can go and install the Android development platform. There's a lot of good resources available to sort of help you out as far as this goes. One of the reasons when we were developing the mobile curriculum, one of the questions was, should we have more Android classes or should we have more iPhone classes? And one of the deciding characteristics was that one thing that's good about the Android development process is that you can develop for Android across multiple platforms. In other words, you can do Android development on a Windows environment, you can do Android development in a Mac environment or a Linux environment or whatever. So you're not tied to a particular one. iPhone development, you have to use a Mac to do iPhone development. So for that reason, that was one of the, in a perfect world, we'd be able to have a couple classes of both platforms, but with the requirements of a degree and so on, it seemed like we could only, on one platform have two and one platform have one. So that was really a big influencer on the decision that we made to have a couple of Android classes. Questions at this point? Unfortunately, I got the wrong adapter for the new MacBook. So this doesn't fit into any of these. All right. So I'm going to attempt to show you going to attempt to show you a little mini tour of Eclipse from here. See how this goes. I don't think that's legible at all, is it? Do you have everything installed for Android? I'll tell you what. Well, let me try to do it this way. If we need to move a little closer, we can all move a little closer. So let me try to do it this way. Because if there's no application, I have to get an application on it and all that. So yeah. So let's try this. All right. Here is Eclipse, and we can move forward as needed. I have an application out there already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import it into this guy's workspace for me to do some things with, to do some development and to do what I need to do. So I'll go up here and say File, Import, and this says existing Android code in the workspace. So if you download one of the examples off of the website for the Deedle book, then you'd put them somewhere, and this is where you'd go and import them. Root directory of that. I have to go and browse. And if I'm not mistaken, it was in downloads. Here is a particular folder. This is a little application called Photographer. And I can click Open. And I can click Finish. It'll do its thing, and it will go and it will import it in here. All right. We're not really going to do anything too elaborate with this. We're just going to take a tour. This is a set of files it brings in associated with it, and the tools associated with it, along with some things that it generates. Notice that there's quite a few different directories for this. All right. So there's a lot of files associated with any Android application. To run it then, I can simply click on the application and do a right mouse and say run as, and I can say Android application, and I can click that. What it's doing now is it's firing up the emulator. And depending on your machine and any number of factors, this can actually take a long time. All right, is that your experience, or? Yeah. Yeah, so this takes a while. A lot of times that's why when I will develop and I'll use a device. That seems to happen a lot quicker. We'll take a look at devices in a second. Essentially, we haven't demonstrated this, but essentially there's associated a target version of Android with this. You have to make sure the device you're testing on is at least that target version. So it's going in and it's thinking about it, and it's thinking about it hard. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. There we go. Finally it brought up. So that's fairly quick. Finally it brought up this little application that has just a couple pictures. Real simple, straightforward application. It has a couple pictures in it. All right. This is the emulator. So the first assignment involves you downloading some of the Deedle examples, and you can either do it on your machine, all right, or you can do it on the lab's machine. But I just want to make sure you're familiar with that you have some setup that you can do your Android development on. So you will download this, open up one of the example applications from Deedle, and then go in and run it and get some take some screenshots to show that you've opened it up and you have run the application. What do you mean run off of a thumb drive? Yeah, I wouldn't think you'd be able to run this off a thumb drive. You could try. You could try. Yeah. Repeat that, please. Yeah, you could put the workspace. You could put the work files on, your application on a thumb drive, and then use that to go back and forth between this. Right. Right. You had a question?
Yeah, I know that.
Mm-hmm. Right. The development platform is the development environment is cross-platform, not the application that you create. So that's two different things. In other words, you probably can't run the development platform on an Android device, right? Because the development platform is meant to be done on a computer, not on a mobile device. So the development platform, works in Linux, works in the Mac operating system, works in Windows. Then the apps that you develop then can be installed on Android. So we have to differentiate between running the development environment and running the applications that get generated from that. All right, if we can close this. you'll see that one of the tools that you download is the virtual device manager. And this one allows you to create a particular flavor of virtual machine. So for example, I have created a device called Test2 that has a target of Android 4.2.2. So if I were to try to run, I could create another test device that emulated a earlier version simply by creating new, and then I could go in, specify the name of the device, I could choose what physical device I want to emulate, and then finally what target I want to emulate. Now, actually, I stand corrected. I said I had installed a couple different platforms. Apparently, I only installed the one platform on this. I installed the 4.2.2. So that's the only kind of test environment that I can create on this particular thing. Of course, you can also run it on an actual Android device, provided you have a couple settings on your device. One other disadvantage of running in the Apple environment is it's very tightly controlled who can go and install apps on machines. It's quite an ordeal. In the Android world, it's a little simpler. I'm going to go to Settings. Now, depending on the particular device, there can be differences here, but typically in settings, one of the settings will be near the bottom, and it says Developer Options, and I'll click on that. And what I can do is I can choose, this option says USB debugging, might be a little hard to see. USB debugging, that is turned on. That means when I plug it in via USB device, I can debug Android applications and allow for mock locations. The other thing I can, the other setting under Apps is under Security is allow installation of apps from sources other than the Play Store. And since the apps I develop are not going through Google's Play Store, they're just simply things that I developed on my own, I need that checked as well. So in order to test on an actual device, you need to do those two things. You need to enable USB debugging, and you need to select or allow for apps from unknown locations. When you've done that, then running it from a device is easy. You simply, easy, why am I turning this around? Every one of these Android devices has its power switch in a different place, by the way. Right. As I'm aware of now. All right. So So I can go and I can plug this into my USB port. Now when I go run this, it actually asks me, what do I want to run this on? Yeah. I have a choice of running it either on the device, which is plugged in, or the emulator that I ran before. So I can simply choose that I want to run it on the actual device. And notice that, boom, it comes up a lot quicker than it did on the emulator. So a lot of times while I'm developing, I'll run it on a device because that's a little bit quicker than that. And the nice thing is even if you unplug it then, it actually has installed this device, this app on the device. So if I look at my list of apps, somewhere here, will be that app. Oh, here it is. There it is. It wasn't called Photographer, it's called Welcome for some reason. All right. So the nice thing is, as far as testing it goes, you don't even, you can create a test app for yourself, put it on the machine, and then you can unplug it, and you have that app on your machine if you want to go and demo it to someone or whatever. So our job over the next couple days is to make sure that you are familiar with getting the Android environment installed on a machine. I think that would be the ideal, right? Because you don't want to necessarily be limited to just working here. You want the ability probably to work on this at home. So getting it installed on your laptop and set up so that it works, and then being able to import an application, one of the DDLS sample applications, and getting just a nice little screen print from that. So that's sort of your job the first week. There's any number of resources online. There's a good explanation of the book, and we kind of laid out the process that you need to go through for that. Once we do that, then we maybe can spend a little bit of time reviewing Java, and before we dive into our first Android app, just to make sure that we're set on the basics of Java before we jump in on that. Are there any questions at this point? All right.